Welcome back.
This is Obscurigami, a hopefully enjoyable podcast where myself, Thomas,
And myself, Ben.
talk about obscure things.
How do we define obscure? We have that discussion
So far,
almost every episode.
Yeah, almost every episode. So far, we've maintained that pretty much any topic is free game as long as the podcast itself is obscure.
Right.
Once it makes the plunge into popularity, then we'll have to start worrying about whether or not our topics themselves are obscure. But
Right.
obscurity really is relative.
Slow death is one of our topics
Wow.
today.
Did not see that coming.
It's a specific kind of slow death.
Oh, so this specific type of slow death is obscure.
It is
Hopefully.
pretty obscure.
Right.
Okay. Only about 40 families suffer from this genetic disorder.
Oh, wow.
It is literally not sleeping until you die.
Is this something that happens at birth? Or just, like, what?
Well, it's a genetic disorder that sets on you in middle age. It's called familial insomnia. And it's basically one day, there's 4 stages to the disease, and one day you just start having problems sleeping, and then that gets progressively worse until you're basically not ever in a state of sleep. And from the way I understand it, you can sink into a state where you're not completely conscious, but if they hook you up to an EEG, they basically never see the patterns of like REM sleep or deep sleep. Like you're just in a state of
Right.
basically a coma where you're not completely conscious, and then you start having hallucinations, and then you're sort of like sleepwalking. You lose the ability to like stand up or the ability to communicate effectively with people, and then gradually you just sort of slip away
You basically just die
of not sleeping.
So, does death of not sleeping happen to people who don't have this?
To this disease? This specific disease?
Because I'm like, it seems like dying of not sleeping is a thing that would happen
Right.
to some people given certain circumstances. But is that?
I think
do you know if
most
that's
of the
something-
cases of people dying without sleep are people who like pushed themselves too far and didn't get
Right.
enough sleep and then
Right.
suffered the consequences to their body
But
because
people-
of that, and then died from those things.
From those things, but people generally don't die literally because they could not
Right.
fall asleep.
Right. Because your body theoretically should force you to sleep.
Right.
But what's happened is there's these proteins that are misfolded. They're called prions.
Right.
And the prions live in your thalamus, and they eat away at parts of your brain. It's the same basic cause of like mad cow disease and CJD, which is like crut Jacobson. Hold on, I can't remember how to pronounce it. I can see the words. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. The distinguishing factor about these diseases is that there's no cure for them. There's no known treatment.
So these prions are munching away.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse my glibness. I know this is not
This is not nearly as light.
something to be flippant about.
Not nearly as light as, say, Gregor McGregor
Right.
sending 50 people to their deaths in the jungle.
Yeah, but these prions, they're munching away. But are they hitting a specific part of your brain that's causing you to not be able to sleep, or are they just indiscriminately chowing down and causing other problems?
I mean, it must be a specific part of the
simultaneously?
brain that causes it to...
Right.
And I'm sure it's like different parts of the brain depending on what disorder you have.
Because this is the primary... I see. So the prions...
So for like FFI or fatal familial insomnia,
Right.
it's a specific part of your brain that they're
I see. So these
destroying.
These prions can cause numerous different
Right.
issues, and FFI is
Right.
one of those.
This is a particular genetic strain.
Are all prion issues slow death types of things?
Not
would
that
fall
I
into the classification
know
of slow
of.
death.
I don't think mad cow disease is. I didn't spend a lot of time researching the
researching
other
that. Okay.
diseases.
Well, I'll keep my line of questioning within
No,
FFI.
that's a fair question.
So
I know CJD is. a slow death. Type
It
of
seems
situation.
like the familial.
And some people believe Alzheimer's is a
Maybe.
prion-caused disease as well.
Interesting. It's full
Which
of
is a slow
proteins.
death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like the familial aspect of it is kind of a significant
Right.
aspect. Does it happens to entire families?
Well, the way it happens is it affects like one. So let's say one parent has it, and the other parent does not. It has a 50-50 chance of affecting the child.
Okay.
So it may or may not be passed on, and it doesn't usually set on until middle age. So you might not know that you're a carrier. You might not know,
Right.
because your father or your parents might not have had it or known that they were carrying it. It is something that can be detected by a blood test, though.
Okay, so you can get tested for it.
Right.
Do you know anything about the discovery of this? Because I'm sure it was something that for a while was not diagnosed, and people were very...
I'm glad you asked that, Thomas. As a matter of fact, the believed patient zero for this was a man in Venice in 1765. So it's that old of a disease. But he was placed in an asylum, and most people throughout history who've suffered from this disorder have faced a lot of different diagnosis. And there haven't been a lot of cases where they actually examined people to find out what was going on, where they
Right.
actually did brain studies until the 80s, until they actually found out that it was prions that were causing it. And since then, they've been looking for a cure. As far as like what originally caused it to happen, like it's a genetic mutation. So like,
Right.
nobody really knows why all of a sudden these proteins just decided to mutate.
It just reminds me of one of those things that would have been largely misunderstood, and like
Yeah.
you would have some uncle that like, oh well, he just went crazy in his 30s and like didn't sleep for a month and then died. And there wouldn't be much more
You generally last about 7 to 8 months.
okay.
So you start by, that's from like the very beginning, like the onset of like,
Right.
you start
But you're
having
not-
like severe insomnia
Right. But
all
from
the way through to the death.
the onset is not like the from the onset you may sleep after it onsets. It just eventually works itself up to
To the point that you're not sleeping.
yeah, you're not sleeping at
Right.
all.
So it's not like you don't sleep for 7 months.
Right.
But like by the time you're into like stage, I think it's 2, you're already not ever in a state of real sleep.
How many stages are there?
4.
4. I think you already said that.
Yeah.
Randy Gardner is the record holder for not sleeping
I think 11 days.
11 days and 24 minutes.
Yeah. Stumbled across him.
Yeah, I'm curious if anyone with FFI
Has him beat.
has him beat only to end up in death.
Well, I think what they're talking about as far as his record, from what I could discern, because I was a little confused, I think his record is staying completely awake. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, I see.
Where he was not even in a state of kind of stupor or sleepwalking.
Right.
Kind of not. You're not really. Your brain's not in a state of sleep.
Yeah.
Is what happens.
Whereas,
So even though these people are not necessarily fully conscious,
yeah,
and they can even be driven into a coma. One of the interesting things is that sometimes drugs that you think, well, you could just knock somebody out with drugs,
right,
barbiturates, and just put them into a sleep, but actually that will send them into a coma, and the EEGs show that they're still not asleep.
interesting.
They're just in a state of
some sort of
non-rest.
Right.
It fascinates me because it's one of those things that you don't ever think about really being deprived of unto death. Like you could be deprived of water or like food, and like we think about that all the time, like dehydration and starvation, but we rarely think about the lack of sleep being something that could go so far as to kill you.
Right. Yeah, it's just, I guess it feels like one of those things that's so natural to our bodies, like breathing, that like you hardly hear people like holding their breath to death, or like you know losing the ability to like remember how to breathe and then dying just through their own body's inability to like perform a function, a self-sustaining function.
The other thing is, like, mad cow disease is something that spreads, obviously, through eating contaminated beef, but are any of these other prion diseases transmittable? And I wasn't really able to find anything that indicates that they are, but just an interesting idea.
There's a never scientifically verified account of Thai Ngok, N-G-O-C, Ngok.
Yep.
He was born in 1942 and claimed in 2006 to have been awake for 33 years, or 11,700 nights, according to a Vietnamese news organization.
I've stumbled across him as well. A lot of people believe that he has slept in the sense that he's been rested in some form. Whether or not he can tell, and a common occurrence with sleep disorders is you kind of lose your ability to tell if you're asleep or not.
Yeah.
So, and that's pretty much the case with all the sufferers from FFI. But his story is considered a possible case of FFI. But there's not a lot of scientific study that's been done into his specific case. So he's a very interesting fellow. He still works a regular job and carries buckets of water to the fields and lives his life.
So now there's another thing to add to your list of things that, you know, you hope you never have a doctor tell you, well, you have FFI.
Right.
Good luck trying to sleep for the next 7 months as you walk slowly into the night of unending non-rest.
It's just about one of the worst ways to die that I can think of.
Yeah. Sounds pretty terrible.
It's just agony, not being able to sleep.
Terrible.
Or ever rest.
Yeah.
There's a couple documentaries on YouTube that I'll include links to on the show notes. But one of them regards a pair of sisters whose father died from the disorder, and it was about their decision whether or not to get tested. And one sister decided not to get tested, to see if she had it. And she said, "Well, we all have a terminal something." And it's just, I don't know, it's sobering to think about that.
If you get tested, is it a sure thing that it's going to? The testing just tells you if you're a carrier, not if it will actually, because not everyone who carries it.
I'm not 100% sure. My understanding was that the testing would tell you if you had the disease.
I see.
Not necessarily that you would die from it, that it would set on.
Right. Interesting.
But interestingly enough, the sister who did get tested had children anyway. And her test came back negative, I guess, so.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting and unusual way to go.
Slow death FFI.
There's a lot of research that's going on into developing drugs that can fight prions. What's interesting about them is that they don't have any DNA, and so they can't be attacked in the same way that normal viruses can.
Right.
So there's a lot of research into trying to kill them by tying off fibril ends, but they can't be destroyed by alcohol, boiling, acid, standard autoclaving methods, or radiation.
Wow.
So they're pretty hard to fight.
Yeah, they're hardy little fellas. I wonder what these people do to treat themselves as it's happening, because you think pain, you can take a pain medication
or a sleep aid
for if you're in other kinds of, if you're in pain or you're going through something else, you could take drugs, or painkillers, but what do you do if you're not sleeping,
right,
to kind of ease your,
and the sleep aids don't help,
right? You can't take a sleep aid. Do you just occupy your mind so you don't go crazy while you're awake? Or
well, by the time you're at the point where you can't sleep, you're already having hallucinations,
right?
So you're already not
really with it.
Yeah, you're already starting to lose your consciousness and your focus, and it's basically a form of dementia is what it is. But it's brought about by lack of sleep.
Terrible. Well,
let's cheer things up a bit.
Another terrible thing is our random Wikipedia articles section, which we'll do now.
Oh, that is terrible.
I'm going to hit the button, and we'll see.
Do you want to explain what this section is?
Well,
further?
This is just a section where we hit the random article button on a wikipedia.org, the infamous website.
Thank you for that concise and well-worded explanation.
And then we just kind of see what it is and we talk about it.
So what has the internet brought us this fine evening?
This evening we have the M1134 or 1134 anti-tank guided missile vehicle.
Ooh.
It's a United States armored fighting vehicle from the Stryker family of vehicles, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with.
Now, what is a Stryker family of vehicle?
The Stryker family, Ben, since you're not familiar, is the interim armored vehicle, Stryker. It's a family of 8-wheeled armored fighting vehicles derived from the Canadian Lav 3 and based on the Swiss Piranha 3 8x8.
They look
as we all know.
Yes, of course. They look like vehicles that I've seen often in war movies and Godzilla films. So that they're very familiar.
Yeah.
To my eyes, even though I didn't know they were called.
If you haven't seen the M1134 anti-tank guided missile vehicle, you've probably seen something like
of a similar nature.
Yeah. One of the most interesting aspects of this to me is you can probably check the show notes out for a photo of this, or just Google. It's this sort of like cage slat armor. I guess that's an optional thing since this photo says fitted with slat armor.
Right.
But
what's the scale of what I'm looking at here? Like how tall? It says like weight and length.
Height 8 foot 8 inches.
Gotcha. So it's similar to a tank in size, but maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Looks like.
The anti-tank guided missile vehicle, shortened to ATGM, reinforces the brigade's infantry battalions, reinforces a brigade's reconnaissance squadron, and provides long-range direct fires.
So that weapon on the top there is basically a missile launcher to take out enemy tanks. Enemy
tanks specifically. What I want to know is if there's an anti-tank guided missile vehicle.
So an anti-tank.
Yeah, what do you clearly we have vehicles now for taking out tanks.
Right. How do you anti the antis?
How do you take out the anti-tank vehicles?
Right.
That's
you got to bring in the anti-antis.
Yeah.
Nuke 'em. It has a Caterpillar engine, I see.
Of the 300 Stryker vehicles in a Stryker brigade combat team, 9 are M1134s.
When was this particular vehicle manufactured?
Might find more just learning about the Stryker the Stryker vehicle type in general. 1999.
They started making Strykers.
General Eric Shinseki, then U.S. Army Chief of Staff, outlined a transformation plan for the Army that would allow it to adapt post-Cold War conditions. An early phase of the plan called for the introduction of an interim armored vehicle, which was intended to fill the capability gap between heavy and lethal, but not easily deployable vehicles. Basically, these things are attempting to fill that gap between a Humvee, which would be a lighter armored, but easy to get out there vehicle.
Right, very mobile.
Very mobile, and a tank, which would be much heavier armored, but much more difficult to deploy.
So it wasn't just intended as an anti-tank.
The Stryker family of vehicles, which the M1134 looks basically to be a Stryker vehicle with some certain modifications made to it.
It's a specific member of the family.
Yeah.
But in general, the vehicles aren't just intended to fight tanks. They have a more general purpose in that they fill that gap.
Yeah. Initial production in 2005 for evaluation, and full production in 2007.
Gotcha. So they're pretty new.
It looks like they're still being made.
I wish that our random Wikipedia articles came with a random article expert to just tell us interesting facts.
Yes.
That we might be missing. I do have to say, that thing is pretty neat.
I'm really curious about the
slat armor.
The slat armor, what the necessity of that is. Slat armor, also known as bar armor, cage armor, and standoff armor, is a type of vehicle armor designed to protect against anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade attacks.
Hmm.
So their anti-tank vehicles have anti-tank missile.
Defenses. What? How is it more defensive?
It takes the form of a rigid slatted metal grid fitted around key sections of the vehicle, which disrupts the shaped charge of the warhead by either crushing it, preventing optimal detonation from occurring, or by damaging fusing mechanism, preventing detonation outright.
Wow.
Interesting.
Because it doesn't look like you're more protected.
It basically looks like a little grill, like somebody made a large grill grating and just bolted it to the side.
Huh. And that's more effective against those kind of weapons. Huh.
I mean, I guess even if that was triggering the detonation, just to have the detonation happening 6 inches to a foot away from your hull instead of directly on the hull could probably help quite a bit in mitigating.
Although it sounds like it can do more than that,
Yeah, it sounds like it may even just stop it from happening sometimes. But
pretty handy.
It's been used in the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan.
Well, slow death and weapons of war. This has been a very cheerful episode of Obscurigami.
Soldiers anecdotally refer to strikers as Kevlar coffin. So on that note, most uplifting episode. This one will follow in stark contrast to the
episode
turbine engines episode, if it does in fact end up preceding this one.
If you didn't hear the turbine episode, it's because we didn't release it, and you're welcome.
If you listened, if you haven't listened to this episode yet, if you're listening to the end of this episode to find out if you want to listen to the previous 20 minutes or so,
you're a horrible person, and why are you doing that?
Why are you doing that? But also, if you were a little put off by the joviality of the previous episode, assuming it was the turbine engine episode,
just listen to this episode.
Listen to this episode. It's a nice little downer.
I think they balance each other out.
Yeah.
They're kind of like a duo.
Yeah. I haven't really seen a lot of the download numbers yet, seeing as how we haven't put this up.
I don't know.
I'm afraid we're losing listeners.
I've personally interacted with our listening audience, and it seems like they're still pretty enthralled with us. So,
well,
as much as they ever have been.
If you're enthralled and you're listening to this, send us some feedback, or if you happen to know a lot about the M1134,
please don't kill us.
Please,
for our ignorance.
Yeah,
you can see the show notes on the interwebs, obscurigami.com.
Obscurigami.com.
Send us an email.
All things obscure, including this podcast. I think that about wraps it up. Most likely.
I think that's the show.
Another one in the bags.
In the cans. Cans France.
They should do some type of ice bucket challenge for the FFI, but not the ice bucket challenge because that's already been done.
Right. Something to raise awareness.
Yeah, raise awareness. Raise some. I mean, it's only 40. What did you say? 40 families. It's not that many people. But still,
not that many people.
It's a horrible way to go.
It's pretty bad.